Okay, so in today's lesson, we're going to go back to biology and we're going to stay on biology for the rest of the term. And we're going to go back to health and disease, okay, like we were looking at before chemistry. But when we did the last topic on health and disease, we focused a lot on communicable diseases. So diseases that are caused by bacteria and caused by viruses, such as the flu and the chicken pox. In this topic, we're going to focus on diseases that are non-communicable, so that aren't caused by bacteria or viruses. And we're going to look at how some of those diseases can be treated. Before we look at those different types of disease, we are going to look at stem cells. So in today's lesson, we're just going to do the biology of stem cells. And then once we've covered stem cells and you know what they are and why they're important, then in future lessons, we're going to look at how stem cells can be used to treat different types of disease. Okay, so we are back on biology. It relates to what we've done before in that it's going to be very much centered around health and disease. The first lesson is going to be on stem cells. And then after covering the biology of stem cells, we're going to have a look at how they can be used to treat disease. Okay, I'm going to start by drawing just a general image, the general diagram for an animal cell. Okay, so I'm just going to draw out a bit of a blob shape. And I'm going to put in a dark structure there in the center. And what I want you to do is I want you to pause this video and I want you to label that diagram for yourself. And once you're happy with your labels, press play to see if they match mine. Okay, so hopefully your labeled diagram looks something like this. You should be labeling this structure here, the nucleus, okay? And just make sure your label actually touches the nucleus. All of this bit here in the center, this jelly-like substance is called the cytoplasm. And this line here on the outside, that's the cell membrane, okay? If there's a double line on the outside, you've got a cell wall on the outside and a membrane on the inside. If it's just that single line, then it's the cell membrane, okay? Animal cells don't have cell walls. There are a few additional structures you could add here, okay? You could have drawn a few little dots and labels and ribosomes and drawn some other little structures and labels and mitochondria, but I'm just going to stick with a really, really simple image with 3 labels for my animal cell. And I'm just going to write underneath that this is the general image of an animal cell. And when I say animal cell, I do include humans in that. So this is a general image of an animal cell, but okay, there are over 200 different cell types, and this is just in humans. So we have this general image of what an animal cell looks like, but in reality, there's over 200 different types of cells in the human body, and they don't all look like this, okay? So in fact, if we look at a few specialized cells that you would have encountered already, okay, here I've got the red blood cell, okay, which has this kind of donut shape. It looks nothing like what we've just drawn. Here I've got a nerve cell, which is really like long and thin with all of these little projections at both ends, okay? So again, doesn't really look like what we've just drawn. I've got a muscle cell over here. I've got a white blood cell. All of these different cell types look very different from each other, and they look very different from the image that we've just drawn, okay? So it's important to remember that this is just a general image of an animal cell to show you the types of structures that animal cells have. But you do have over 200 different cell types, and they each have a unique structure. They each have a unique structure. Okay, and we can do an example, e.g. a nerve cell, and we can try and jot down a little nerve cell underneath so we remember what they look like. I mean, oh God, I'm a terrible drawer. So it's got this kind of big head at the top, and then it's like quite thin here, and then at the end, it like branches out into all of these little projections, and then on this end, it also has all sorts of projections, and there's a nucleus in there. God, this is awful. Okay, so it looks something like this. Okay, this is what a nerve cell. So this is obviously quite different than what I have just drawn, showing that a nerve cell has a different structure to just the general image of an animal cell. So why do cells have such different structures? Why do they all look so different to each other? And the reason is because each has a structure Okay, and by structure, I just mean what the cell physically looks like. So each cell, each has a structure to match their function. And by their function, I just mean their job. So what I'm saying is that what the cell looks like relates to the job that that cell does. Okay, they look different because they've got different jobs, and how they look relates to the job that they do. Okay, so if I were to give you an example, all right, nerve cells are responsible for sending messages from your brain to all the other parts of your body, and they're quite long and thin, and they've got branches at both ends. Because they've got branches at both ends, that allows them to join up and make connections with other nerve cells, so that that message can spread from your brain the whole way down to your foot if it needs to. They're long and thin with lots of branches so they can connect with each other. Then you're over here, you've got a muscle cell, okay? Your muscles allow you to move, so muscle cells are quite flexible, okay? They need to be able to move. Red blood cells also quite flexible. It needs to squeeze through all of your veins and arteries as it carries oxygen around the body. So it needs to be flexible and squeeze through the blood vessels, okay? So each of your different cell types has a unique structure, okay? So it looks a certain way because it's got a unique function, because it has a certain job. So each has a structure to match their function. Okay, so if you've got over 200 different cell types, they all look different. The question is, where do all of these cell types come from? That might not have been a question that you've ever asked yourself. Where do all of these different cell types come from? Okay, but if we look back at the kind of the beginning of all life, okay, so if we go back to the very beginning, and by that I mean back to the point where the sperm meets the egg. So this here is labeled an oocyte, but it's just another word for an egg. So you got the sperm meets the egg, and when it does so, you form a fertilized egg. Okay, so a fertilized egg is just one cell. Okay, so we all start out as just one cell, the fertilized egg, which can also be called a zygote. So how can you get over 200 different cell types when we're all starting out, when every cell, starts out from just one individual cell? How does this one individual cell become so many different cell types? Okay, and what will happen initially is this fertilized egg, which is just one cell, will split in two and it will become two cells. And then those two cells will split in two again, and two cells will become four cells. And then 4 becomes 8, and 8 becomes 16, and so on, and so on, and so on. And the cells just keep growing and growing and growing, and the ball of cells gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And when you've got a big ball of cells, okay, right at the start, I'm talking like 5-6 days after the sperm initially meets the egg, and you've got a ball of cells, we call this an embryo. And within the embryo, which I've got a picture of right here, okay, which is like this hollow ball of cells, within that embryo, you have got what are called stem cells. And it's these stem cells, specifically, that are capable of becoming every single cell type in the human body. Okay, so you start out as just one single cell, the fertilized egg, that divides multiple times until you've got a ball of cells called an embryo, and within that ball of cells you have got stem cells, and they can give rise to every single cell type in the human body. Okay, so we're going to write, where do all of these cell types come from? And we are going to write stem cells. That's where we get all of the different cell types in our body, stem cells. And then underneath we're going to write stem cells are found in embryos. Okay, that's where we find them. We get all of these different cell types from stem cells, and we find stem cells in embryos. We're just going to mind ourselves that we're finding these stem cells in embryos at around about 5 to 8 days after fertilization. Just remind you, fertilization is the sperm meets egg. The sperm meets the egg, fertilization. Fertilized egg cell will grow and divide until it forms an embryo, and within that embryo you have got stem cells. And these stem cells are so important because they have the ability, and they alone have the ability, to become every single cell type in the human body. I'm just going to add under here the kind of really, really important sentence, okay? I'm going to write embryonic stem cells. Okay, they're called embryonic stem cells because they're found in the embryo. Embryonic stem cells can become every cell type in the human body. Okay, they can become every cell type in the human body. And this is going to be really, really important when we start looking at different diseases, okay? That these particular cells that you only find them in the embryo, they can become every cell type in the human body, okay? And just so you can wrap your head around kind of where we're at, okay? This is a part of the female reproductive system, okay? This here is the ovary where the egg is released from. So the egg is released from the ovary out here into the oviduct. The sperm meets the egg in the oviduct. Here we're calling it day 0 when the sperm meets the egg. That forms a fertilized egg, okay? And then that fertilized egg splits in 2 and you get 2 cells. And then it splits again and you've got 4 cells, okay? And then you end up with 8 cells, okay? And all the time, this fertilized egg is being pushed down the fallopian tube or the oviduct. Hopefully we remember what is doing the pushing, okay? If you remember back to the last biology topic, we saw ciliated cells, okay? They were cells that had little hair-like projections, and these ciliated cells can sweep the fertilized egg down the oviduct until it arrives here in the uterus, okay? So the cell, your fertilized egg, is growing and dividing all the time, so that by the time it arrives in the uterus, a couple of days later, around a week later, okay, it's a much bigger ball of cells. And it's within this ball of cells here that you have got your embryonic stem cells. So we're literally talking 8 or 9 days after the sperm has met the egg. That is when you've got your embryonic stem cells, okay? And then we know what happens from here. This embryo is going to continue to grow and divide. It's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. It will start to resemble a baby, and then we'll start calling it a fetus, and then it will continue to grow and grow and grow until it is ready to be born. But we're talking here 8 or 9 days after the sperm has met the egg. It's nothing but a ball of cells, which is why we call it an embryo. And within this embryo, you have got embryonic stem cells, which have the potential to become every single cell in the human body. So I've got another handy slide here, which kind of sums up what the stem cell is. Okay, so this here on the left is a stem cell, and you can see it's quite unspectacular in terms of what it looks like. And a stem cell is capable of replicating itself. So this single stem cell can become 2 identical stem cells. Or instead of growing and dividing and making more stem cells, this single stem cell can decide to become a different cell type. So it can decide to become a nerve cell or a red blood cell, okay? Once the stem cell has made the decision to specialize, okay, and to become a specific cell type, then that's it. It can't change its mind and go back to being a stem cell. Okay, so the stem cell can either remain a stem cell and continue to grow and divide, producing more stem cells, or it can choose a different path and it can choose to specialize into a nerve cell or into a red blood cell or into muscle cells. Okay, so it's got 2 choices to make, but once it decides to specialize, it can never go back to being a stem cell. I've got a few questions I'm going to get you to answer. The first one is just what is the function of a stem cell? So what do stem cells do? Why are they important? Where do we find stem cells? And then the last question just relates to what was on my last slide. Why is it important that stem cells can replicate themselves as well as specializing into different cell types? So just pause and just take a minute to answer those 3 questions in your book, and then I'm going to go through the answers in a moment. Okay, so I've written some answers. What is the function of a stem cell? So I wrote to make all other cell types in the body. Okay, that's the primary function, is to specialize and to become all of the other cell types that we've got in our bodies. Where do we find them? We find them in embryos. Okay, and there are other places. I'll get to that in a minute. But for the moment, we're just going to say we find stem cells in embryos. Why is it important that stem cells can replicate themselves as well as specializing into different cell types? So this relates back to this diagram here, where I said that stem cells can replicate and make more of themselves, or they can become different cell types. And I've written, it is important that the stem cells are not all used up before every type of cell is formed. So say you are back in kind of the first few months after this sperm has met the egg, and you've got your group of stem cells, and they all decide, right, we're all going to specialize and become nerve cells. Okay, well then what about the red blood cells? Okay, you need red blood cells too. And if all of those stem cells decide to become nerve cells right at the start, then there's no stem cells left to make the red blood cells. So yes, it's important that they're making all of these new cell types, but if they can't divide and make more of themselves, then you're going to run out of stem cells before all of the other cell types are made. So it's really important that they can make more of themselves as well as making all of the other cell types. Okay? Now, I've spoiled the surprise. I just mentioned, okay, that embryos are not the only place that you can find stem cells. And the question I was going to ask you was, do we have stem cells in adults? So do we ourselves, as, adults, or in your case, students, what have I done? Do we have stem cells? And the answer is yes. Okay, we're not embryos anymore, but we do still have stem cells. Can you think of why we might need stem cells in our bodies? Okay, we're going to need them to grow and repair. Okay, so the cells that you've got, so say for example the skin cells that you've got, they get damaged every day. Even getting out of the shower and just drying yourself vigorously with a towel, you're going to exfoliate and you're going to remove lots of the skin cells. So it's really important that you have got stem cells in your body that can reproduce all of those skin cells that you've lost. Okay, and it's not just in your skin. There's lots of parts of your body where your cells are constantly being damaged or are dying. And it's important that we have got stem cells to grow and also to replace the cells that have been damaged. Okay, so even as adults, when you're not actually growing anymore, you're not getting taller, you do still need to be able to repair the cells that you've got. And we use adult stem cells to do that. Okay, now there is a key difference between adult stem cells and embryonic stem cells, which I'm going to jot down for you in a little table. But first we'll just write down what adult stem cells are. So adult stem cells are important for growth and repair. So repairing damaged and replacing damaged cells. Adult stem cells are important for growth and repair. They're found in some, but not all, adult tissues, and they're commonly found in the tissues that need a lot of growth or that get regularly damaged. So I'm just going to write e.g. the skin, and I'm going to write the intestines, okay, because your intestines are responsible for digesting food, and there's a really high turnover of the cells in your intestines because they get damaged and broken down when they're breaking down the food. Okay, I'm going to include one more actually as well. That's your bone marrow. I don't even know what type of cells are produced in your bone marrow. It's actually your blood cells that are made in your bone marrow. Okay, and you've got stem cells within your bone marrow that make all of your different blood cells. Okay, so you do have stem cells as an adult because you need them for growth and repair, and they're found only in certain tissues. Okay, but there's a key difference between adult stem cells and embryonic stem cells. And embryonic. And this is going to be important when we talk about diseases and why embryonic stem cells have an advantage. Okay, embryonic stem cells can become every cell type. There's no restrictions on them whatsoever. They can become every single cell type. And there's a word that describes that, and that word is pluripotent. Adult stem cells can only become cells of a specific type. And the easiest way to explain this is just to use an example. Okay, so e.g., blood stem cells. So stem cells that you find in your bone marrow, because that's where blood cells are made. Blood stem cells can only make blood cells. Okay, so there's 3 different types of blood cells. So your blood stem cells can make red blood cells, they can make white blood cells, they can make platelets, but they can't make nerve cells, and they can't make skin cells. Your nerve stem cells, your brain stem cells, they can make the different types of nerve cell, but they can't make blood cells and they can't make skin cells. Your skin stem cells can make the different types of skin cells, but they can't make blood cells and they can't make muscle cells. Okay, so in an adult stem cell, they are more restricted. Okay, they can only become cells of a specific type, the same organ that they are a part of. So blood stem cells can only make blood cells. Brain stem cells can only make brain cells. Okay, so it's more restricted compared to embryonic. They can just make every single cell type. Okay, and I think, to be fair, that's pretty much all I want you to know about stem cells for now. Because in the next lesson, we're going to look at why they can be used to treat different diseases. Okay, so the big take home, because you do come back to stem cells in year 10, the big take home is this: embryonic stem cells can become every cell type in the human body. Okay, they're cells that you find in the developing embryo, and they can become every single cell type in the body. Okay, which is really powerful. Yes, we do have stem cells as adults, but they're a lot more restricted. They can only become certain types of cells. On the next lesson, we are going to look at the therapeutic applications of stem cells. So how stem cells can be used to cure different diseases.